Good afternoon, faculty. I wanted to talk to you about the summer read, which was Leisure, the Basis of Culture by Josef Pieper. He is a World War II era famous philosopher, and I have never read any essays by him, and this is my first, and he is a famous era philosopher and well respected. I must say I enjoyed the essay but found it difficult, even coming from a philosophy theology background. And I found it fascinating and really liked it, but I had to go through it a couple of times. So I thought it might be helpful for those who want to listen on for me to just give you some ideas on the essay to kind of maybe give you a framework to put his thoughts in. It may help you. I'm certainly not an expert on this philosopher. I open comments up to Dr. Chandler, Mr. Gray, and the entire theology department, all of whom certainly have deep understandings of these constructs as well. But I thought I might give you a shot at some of the ways in my mind that I kind of, with broad strokes, sliced the argument, if you could. And it helped me, and perhaps it'll help you. One of the things I think you need to understand is this idea of epistemology. Epistemology is how we know something is certain in philosophy, how we know something is real. And over time, epistemology kind of evolved from what the classic Greek and Roman theories were on epistemology to sort of a very subjectivist view of these guys, Kant, Hume, and Sartre. And Pieper makes a point that the ancients, Plato and Aristotle, had a different view on the joy of learning, the happiness of an aha moment, the idea of intuition and being with a thought and pondering a thought. They didn't see learning always or even primarily as work. So when they talk about leisure, leisure is where it derives from the word school in the ancient world. And one of the things you can say about Plato and Aristotle is they believe in this idea of the forms, right? So that while you can know true things about something by measuring it and looking at geometry and what have you, some of the best things that you can learn about something come in the way that they reflect these forms out in the universe, who as Christians we would call God. Many people think that Aristotle and Plato were precursors to Christianity. So if we all agree that a rose is more beautiful, alive, and fresh than a crispy, crunchy, wilted one, right? We all agree with that. And the philosophers would say, why? Well, because the fresh, beautiful rose participates or reflects the idea of beauty in the forms, or roseness in the forms, or smelly, beautiful smelling fragrance in the forms. It participates to a greater degree or reflects that more perfectly. And if we put 10 roses in front of us and someone said, this is the most beautiful rose, that rose would participate to a greater percentage in this form, right, of beauty. And all the great ideas that are non-tangible have a form, like justice and truth and love, the unmoved mover. God is the unmoved mover, the form of love. So why do I say that? Because the idea of learning for an ancient wasn't just about work and measurement. That was a piece of it. But the real joy of learning was to ponder something. You come across a rose or even a mathematical problem for building some great structure, and you sit with it, and you're at peace with it, and you ponder it. And sort of through intuition, your soul, in a sense, comes to understand the forms that this idea reflects. There's a certain joy and peace and almost spirituality to it. Interestingly enough, what Christians would say, how angels, because they don't have bodies, five senses, they encounter us and understand us through intuition, right? Very similar to what Plato and Aristotle would have said about an aspect of learning. The other piece you need to understand, so this idea of school having a leisurely aspect, not lazy, right? Not goofing off, but not all of school is hard work. Some of it is the joy of encountering something, pondering something, and letting transcendent ideas come and fall upon you, right? And then this idea of culture, culture is I guess, aligned very much with this idea of cult. In an ancient world, right, the real ritual of public sacrifice or festivals were days off, right, from work, right, to celebrate the sacrifice we did earlier in the week, and to publicly celebrate sacrifice and the divine nature between work and enlightenment, if you will. So there was always this kind of religious aspect of festivals where we sort of thank the gods for the joy of enlightenment, right? And also say that it's okay, our sacrifice or our work in becoming enlightened was well worth it. So an ancient academy or school or a classic school always sort of had a transcendent knowledge piece of it and a thanking the gods piece of it. Now, certainly this parallels very well to Catholic schools, right? Where we don't just teach, right, to make people get better grades and get more scholarships and make more money. Yes, that's a piece of it, but we build character, we build ideas, we build we let transcendent ideas come into the classroom so that kids, in a sense, could be enlightened by that. And our idea of celebration very much is this idea of communal worship. What does the priest say during the offertory, right? He's taking our monetary gifts, but he's also uniting all the sacrifices of the people during the week, right, with the monetary sacrifices, and he's uniting it with the sacrifices of the cross so that we can receive the grace and peace and salvation of God through the Eucharist. So the Catholic school is sort of the monotheistic, enlightened version, if you will, of the sort of classic academy in that sense. I'm not saying that we have to necessarily teach this language or that language or have this class or that class, but all the classes should be approached with this idea of transcendent knowledge. And then we get to the second shoe dropping in his essay. He talks a lot about Kant and he touches upon Sartre. But so for these gentlemen, as we go from the classics to the Middle Ages to sort of the subjectivists, two things happen. One thing is epistemology becomes much more work, right? Work is associated with truth, not rest and pondering and transcendent enlightenment. Truth comes from me working hard to define life, right? So what Hume and Kant would say is, like, for example, we have our five senses. So you have this jug here, right? And that this jug here is in the phenomenal world, and everything that is in my brain about this jug is in the noumenal world. And there's a movie screen, if you will, between the phenomenal and the noumenal. And I can never know anything truly true about this, absolutely true about this, because everything is being filtered through my five senses, and I don't know if they're lying to me. And the stuff that I can know with relative certainty are things like quantity. There's one here, and shape, it's of this size, because that can be measured with two senses. I'm not certain I'm being tricked by my senses, but I'm relatively certain, right? But things like color and beauty and firmness or softness or smell, they're more subjective, and I can never really discover the truth of them. So that the way we come to truth is very much work and quantitative and mathematical and comparative. And like I, in a sense, define reality, there's no real part of reality that is transcendent upon me by me sitting and letting the jug speak to me, right? I analyze the jug and I make it real, right? There's no part of this jug that gets enlightened into me through any type of spiritual aspect. And of course, this gets translated into the idea of work and society, right? If you don't make a lot of money, you're lazy. If your work is hard and difficult, it's more virtuous than easy work, right? And if you work harder in school, suddenly that's more virtuous than something that may be a liberal art, a freeing art, such as studying art history or what have you. So you see the juxtaposition of this idea of work and non-transcendence and non-enlightenment and productivity being the purpose, right, of life. Life as intellectual work, life as servile work, uh, success as quantitative productivity, if you will. And that's the other piece that he's sort of, I guess, lamenting. And so, what is he even talks about the Middle Ages sort of being, I guess, a transitional time, right? So he says Thomas Aquinas certainly says, love your neighbor, and if it's hard to forgive your neighbor, that's work, but that makes it virtuous. But he points out, right, if you're truly a saint, you should love loving your enemies. You should love forgiving your enemies, so that don't always define holiness with work. The person who struggles to forgive his neighbor is working hard, right? Because he doesn't want to forgive them. But the person who does it most easily is actually more enlightened and holier. And their work, in a sense, is more efficacious because they've been transformed into an enlightened person who forgives their enemies joyfully because they're almost at the level of sainthood. So even Thomas Aquinas said, work is important, but beauty and truth and forgiveness, if they get to this highest level, they're not work. So then I guess it brings us to our, I think, the conclusion. And I think the conclusion that Josef Pieper is making is the idea that in a world, right, where we define truth and we work for truth and we define value with suffering and quantitative earthly productivity, there's no room for cult or culture or transcendence or worship or freedom from the toil of the work. School without culture, right? Life without meaning is all work and no play. And it's in leisure or classic education where we kind of understand the idea that some knowledge is given to us and some knowledge is easy and meditative and pondering and joyful and enlightening. The light bulb goes off and we feel a joy. They call that gnosiological concupiscence, right? The attraction to finding the truth. And isn't this the way a lot of great discoveries took place? Look at Albert Einstein. Some of his greatest discoveries didn't happen in the lab, but when he was out in a rowboat or with his wife or taking a stroll. He was away from the mathematical part, and he let it stew in his head, and transcendently the light bulb went off, right? And this could be true of so many great discoveries. And even ourselves, right? We're working hard on something. We're trying to discover something. We're trying to solve a problem with our kids or what to do with a career choice. And sitting with the pros and cons list, the quantitative list, we almost can never come to the answer, right? But then we decide to take a retreat. We decide to go on vacation. And suddenly we're in a souvenir shop looking at something beautiful, and the light bulb goes off. Or somebody talks to us at a restaurant while we're relaxing, and you say to yourself, oh my gosh, that person was a messenger from God. Or we're sitting at the beach, or most importantly, we're meditating and praying, and the truth comes to us, right? We don't work for the answer is given to us. So in my opinion, those are some of the themes of the essay. Of course, I could be greatly or slightly off base, and I leave that to the other people in the community, but I just thought this may or may not help you couch these terms of leisure and culture and intellectual work as you kind of dance through this essay. So I hope you found it helpful, and thank you for listening.